Historical Society. Let me start by asking, how many visitors do we have from Lawrenceville tonight?
Yay.
We welcome you to our meeting. The Squirrel Hill Historical Society is a volunteer organization which has members, which is incorporated and is a 501c3. So anytime you choose to join us with dues or give us a contribution, that is deductible on federal taxes. We've been around for about 12 years. We don't have our own building. This is our second meeting spot. We've met across the street for a number of years, and now we've been here for, I think it's 5. We have these kind of meetings once every month, 11th month of the year, and they are free, and we welcome you to keep coming back, whether you join us or not. You know, we'd like you to join. Next month's meeting, I think, is a very noteworthy one. The director of the Warhol Museum is going to come and talk about Andy Warhol and the museum and plans for the museum. So we hope you will come. I'm not going to go over the rest of our speaking list because you have it on your chair. We take August off, and then we start again in September. We actually have 2 or 3 more speakers, so we're pretty much scheduled up into September of next year in terms of our speakers. Result of a mixture of volunteers, and tonight's speaker volunteered us and people that we recruit. So please keep coming to the meeting. We have a board of directors and officers. My 2 vice presidents are here tonight. Helen Wilson in the back. Wave. That's Helen. Betty Connolly is in the room. Where's Betty? There's Betty. Betty was the key writer of our Squirrel Hill book a number of years ago. Betty and Helen together are contributing to an exhibit you need to know about, an ongoing exhibit at our library. How many of you have seen our exhibit board at the library? Those of you who haven't, may I suggest you just go by there one day. We have a permanent board there, information about our group, but also rotating exhibits. Starting tonight, a very interesting one, then Squirrel Hill Then and Now, with a series of pictures. Please, it just changed this evening, literally. In August, late August, or mid-August, we're going to do the Morafield. Is that still the big Morafield building down there? And we'll be changing those every 2 months. It also includes a list of what are now 15 books that are available about Squirrel Hill and surrounding area, and other topics of interest to us as Squirrel Hill history that are available to take out, as well as a list of our 73 YouTube recordings of our speakers. We don't, not all of them, because some of our folks did not want to be public, but you can either through our website or by taking out at the library get 73 free programs on our talks, and the list of those programs are both on the website and over at the library. And this talk will also be on that website. The other thing I wanted to mention before we get into our speaker tonight is we just had our annual walking tour, a very nice tour this year again at the cemetery, but we're going to do a special field trip. How many of you were here last month to hear about the Braddock Battlefield? We announced there tentatively that on August 8th, we would be going down to the Battlefield Museum and have the speaker speak to us and show the marvelous exhibits down there. That event, as you see from your chair, is now firm. It will happen at 11 o'clock. People need to get their own way down there and contribute not to us but $5 to the museum, which is a labor of love. But it's really marvelous. I've been down there. We have a list in the back of people. Some people already signed up for that event. If now that you know what time it is, you really want to go, just put yes next to your name. If other people are interested, please put your name on a separate sheet we have. I need to keep the count below 30, so I have to monitor that. Obviously, if you say you're coming, you can pull back out. I'll be checking with you before August 8th. But anyone who's interested, Braddock is a short drive from here. It'll be about a 2-hour event, and you're going to be missing something if you don't do that. Okay? Before I, yes?
It says here at home, I get a number?
That's me, but because you're here, you can sign up tonight, and we won't have to have a call till just before when I confirm to make sure you're coming. Okay? But if you don't sign up tonight and then decide you want to, call in, and we'll keep a running total going. I want that this is a special event. I want that to be a good one. You know, we put out an Arcadia book on the history of Squirrel Hill, which is for 8 years still available. Barbara Burstein, who is a member of this group, and many of you know that she's done a lot of writing in Jewish Pittsburgh, has just put out a book in that series called Jewish Pittsburgh. It just came out a week ago. We'll have a description of it in our next newsletter, but it is now available through Arcadia. And lo and behold, Jim tells us that he has just finished up a book with Lawrenceville for Arcadia. So we'll hear a little about that, and you've gotten sheets actually about a book signing on July 15th. So lots of books moving along. Last thing I want to say, so he doesn't have to say this, is there's a series of books over here. Some written by Jim, some put out by the Lawrenceville Historical Society, which are available for sale. We'll get a small percentage, but that's not why they're there. They're interesting books that we'd like to have people have an opportunity to buy. So they're over there, tables being manned. You can do that after this meeting. We don't shoo you out. Our speaker tonight, and we're very pleased to have had him volunteer to speak, is going to talk about Lawrenceville. I want to recognize a member of our group, Anita Newell. Anita, 4 years ago now, suggested that it was important that this group sometimes talk about neighborhoods that aren't our own, groups nearby. And I think Jim's about the 6th one in our Getting to Know Your Neighbors series. We'll have Point Breeze in March of next year. And we will continue to do this because we do need to stay in touch with nearby. But our speaker, Jim Wudarczyk, I almost did it. Wudarczyk. I knew. Jim has a long career in forest products, but also a long career in volunteering, working with Lawrenceville, was actually a candidate for city council. He has also written a number of books, including those there in the Arcadia. And then consistent with my short introductions, Jim, come on up, and we welcome you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind invitation to be here today. Do you really think I need this microphone?
Yes.
Okay, because I have a big mouth. And one time, let me tell you this story. I had 109 people on a walking tour outside in Lawrenceville, competing with Butler Street traffic, and after an hour and a half, people could still hear me yelling over the crowd. I want to thank you for your kind invitation to be here today to talk about the 4 faces of Lawrenceville. I believe that every neighborhood in Pittsburgh is really a story of evolution or transition. Today I'd like to talk about an overview of the history of Lawrenceville. Considering the fact that the Lawrenceville Historical Society has published 3 books, has a quarterly newsletter that's filled with community stories, and at one time had a website with hundreds of articles and reviews, you can see that it's impossible to jam that much information into one short presentation. So let's start at the beginning with what I like to call the rural face of Lawrenceville. It's difficult to imagine a time when Lawrenceville, with its seemingly endless rows of houses, did not exist. What's even more incredible is the fact that in 1814, Lawrenceville was nothing more than an inn at the forks of the road, forest and meadows. When William B. Foster first purchased 121 acres of land from Alexander B. Hill for about $35,000 in April 1814. He did so for real estate purposes. The elder Foster believed that eventually people living in the city of Pittsburgh would want to move eastward in search of a more rural or semi-rural suburban environment. Over time, his prediction would come true. However, for Mr. Foster, Lawrenceville was a very, very bad investment. Very early after purchasing his 121 acres of ground, he made a disproportionate profit by selling 30 acres to the federal government for purposes of an arsenal. Then it went downhill from there. Foster gave out a lot of land on credit. Yes, sir?
What's an arsenal?
An arsenal is a place owned by the military government of the United States where they either manufactured, fabricated, or stored guns, ammunition, and accoutrements of war.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, there's that Arsenal Park up
Yes, that was the old Allegheny Arsenal. I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
there. Okay.
Okay? So what happened with Mr. Foster is that he gave out titles to the land on credit. Well, the Bank of the United States began to pressure him to pay his mortgage. When he couldn't come up with the money, Foster went after his creditors. Instead of them paying what they owed him, they said, "Here's the deed to your land back." Well, Foster didn't need more land. He needed cash. As a result, he faced bankruptcy and lost most of his Lawrenceville lands to the Bank of the United States. It should be noted that Stephen Foster, the famous composer, who is best known for his more than 280 songs and musical compositions, is by far the most famous person to ever come from Lawrenceville. Contrary to public myth, he was only a small child when his family moved from the white cottage that once stood at 3600 Penn Avenue. Therefore, he did not do any of his songwriting in Lawrenceville. When we look at the first 12 years or so of Lawrenceville history, from 1814 to 1826, we find that Lawrenceville is nothing more than a struggling village of about 200 people. What is more incredible is it's the only village between Bayardstown, which is the present-day Strip District, and another struggling community called East Liberty. Perhaps the most important institution in the early days of Lawrenceville was the Allegheny Arsenal. This topic warrants a presentation by itself. Therefore, I will not dwell on it. But I do want to point out that the first book that makes mention of this Lawrenceville institution was published in 1820. And the title of the book was Trial and Defense of First Lieutenant James Hall of the Ordnance Department. Hall was assigned to the Allegheny Arsenal, and he was court-martialed and removed from military service over failed attempts to apprehend a deserter. Hall felt that he had been unfairly treated and dismissed from military service, so he went directly to President Monroe, and because of his past service to his country, was immediately reinstated into the military. Then, on his own volition, Hall resigned from military service, took up the study of law, set up a practice in Pittsburgh, and wrote the book in 1820 as a vindication of his own reputation. Although city directories are very vague, they are very valuable reference sources for local researchers and anyone really interested in genealogy. The first city directory was published in 1815, and it notes that Lawrenceville was an independent community. Perhaps the directory that tells us most about early community life in Lawrenceville was the 1837 Harris Directory. directory makes note of the fact that many of the people from Pittsburgh, the wealthy people, moved to Lawrenceville to build their villas for purity of atmosphere. This document also tells us that the community had 3 churches and each had its own library. While records of early religious services are very sketchy, we know that the Reverend Joseph Stockton, who was then principal of the Pittsburgh Academy, located in downtown Pittsburgh, would travel as often as possible 3 miles eastward to Lawrenceville in order to conduct religious services for the artisans and soldiers surrounding the Allegheny Arsenal. The first services were held in a 1-room schoolhouse, which was located on Main Street, where the present Foster Community Center stands today. Between 1832 and the end of the American Civil War, Lawrenceville boasted several houses of worship. As far as early education in the days of the village of Lawrenceville, again, we don't have very many good records, but we do know that they did have a 1-room schoolhouse on Main Street. There were also references to a school being on Bellefonte Street, which is the present 44th Street. And in 1853, we had a day and boarding school, which was short-lived, for girls. This was called the Locust Grove Female Seminary, and it was located at 40th and Penn Avenue. Socially, there was a Masonic lodge called the Hamilton Lodge number 173, and this was organized in 1819. Perhaps one of the most notable figures in the early history of Lawrenceville was the Reverend Richard Leah, pastor of the Lawrenceville Presbyterian Church. Reverend Leah was truly loved by his congregation. He served from the early 1830s well into the late 1880s. His congregation loved him so much they would not let this man retire. He actually had to die before they let him out of ministry. But often, he would exhort his congregation, keep out of the way of the law, keep out of debt, keep out of other people's business, and you shouldn't have much trouble at all. That's still sound advice for today. A man who helped to mold the industrial base of the community was Samuel Martin Keir. In 1849, we find that Mr. Keir is drilling for salt along the Allegheny River just north of Pittsburgh. There was a problem with drilling for salt in those days because oftentimes you would hit a nuisance substance called oil. So Keir's very innovative. Everybody else has thrown away this oil because it gets mixed in with the salt brine, and it's really not good for anything. But Keir figured out that he could bottle American crude and sell it for medicinal purposes. That's right. You drank crude oil straight up for whatever ailed you, whether it was a headache, stomach ache, or dysentery. Later, Keir started experimenting with a substance called oil, and he found it was very good for illuminating and lubricating purposes. So, in 1854, he sets up an oil refinery. That was a 1-gallon still in order to process oil. And he sets up this oil refinery in downtown Pittsburgh at 7th and Grant Street. Business was so good that he had to expand to a 5-barrel or 5-gallon still. And that's what got him into trouble with the city fathers. You have to remember in the early 1840s, Pittsburgh had a major fire that destroyed a large portion of the downtown area. Yes, sir?
So like 7th and Grant, wouldn't that be like really close to like where the Mellon building is?
Yeah, down that area.
So it was, you mean
There's
that
a
was-
marker down there today.
Yeah, there's a marker.
So you're saying that used to be like an oil refinery?
Yes,
Where
it was
none is-
a 1-gallon still to process oil. Then they went to a 5-gallon still. But when they went to the 5-gallon still, that was considered a major fire hazard. And the city fathers said, well, if you want to burn down someplace, why don't you go upriver to Lawrenceville? So in 1861, Mr. Keir packed up his steel, and he went along the Allegheny River to Ewald Street, which is now 43rd Street. There he continued to process oil until shortly before his death in 1874. In 1834, Lawrenceville was organized as a borough. In those days, we are still a very rural community, evident by the fact that the borough council passed an ordinance telling you that you had to keep your hogs penned in. Now, if you let your hogs run wild through the streets of Lawrenceville, you could be fined 50 cents per hog. 25 cents was payable to the constable for the trouble at catching your pig, and another 25 cents was payable to the borough treasury. There was also an ordinance that told you how close you could place your outhouse to your neighbor's property. Now, prior to the American Civil War, we had 4 cemeteries in Lawrenceville. The first was the Lawrenceville Burial Ground, which was opened, was now Foster Community Center, and that at one time actually held 500 internments. And this was opened in 1814, and it falls out of disuse after the opening of Allegheny Cemetery in 1844. St. Mary's Roman Catholic Cemetery was founded in 1849, and there was also a Presbyterian cemetery in Lawrenceville, which was later incorporated into Allegheny Cemetery sometime in the 1870s. The borough years ended in 1868 when Lawrenceville was annexed by the city of Pittsburgh. Phase 2 of Lawrenceville is what I call its happy face. And Lawrenceville will wear this happy face from 1865 until 1914. This is the golden age of Lawrenceville. Whereas the population of Lawrenceville in 1850 was 1,600 persons. After the Civil War, there was a tremendous population explosion in the area. This population explosion was fueled in part by the expansion of the railroads in the Strip District. As they were tearing up houses, people had to go somewhere to live. So they might as well go up to Lawrenceville. It's as good a place as any. And then in the 1870s, we find that there's a major second wave of Irish immigrants into Pittsburgh. And many of these Irish immigrants settle in Lawrenceville. It would not be until the end of the 19th century that we find Slavs moving into Lawrenceville in substantial numbers. Keep in mind, 1826, we have 200 people living in Lawrenceville. 1900, there are 33,000 people. The neighborhood of Lawrenceville, prior to the Civil War, was vastly different from the neighborhood after the conflict. As the eminent architectural historian James Van Trump noted, Lawrenceville grew up largely between 1860 and 1900. Now, one prominent man who spans his transition period before and after the Civil War was a man by the name of Alfred L. Pearson. He owned some tracts of land on Pike Street, which is now 39th Street, organized a militia unit called the Allegheny Guards, served with the 155th Pennsylvania Volunteers during the American Civil War, and was a Medal of Honor recipient. Pearson earned the distinction of earned the Medal of Honor for his distinctive services on March 31st, 1865. The Union troops were marching down the Quaker Road toward Lewistown, Virginia. Suddenly, some Confederate snipers hid behind some sawdust piles, and they began to take pot shots at the Union army. The Union soldiers fled in panic. Pearson quickly reorganized the Union troops, led an assault against the sawdust piles. The Confederate snipers ran away, and he cleared away the sawdust piles, so there was a clear opening all the way to Lewistown. Pearson was one of those tough, no-nonsense kind of guys. When the farmers at Gettysburg complained that the Union soldiers were stealing their straw and their hay, Pearson threatened to burn down the farmers' barns for their lack of compassion and their lack of patriotism. In 1870, Pearson was appointed Major General of the Pennsylvania State Guards. Once one of the most popular men in Pittsburgh, he suddenly fell from grace when in 1877 he was assigned the task of breaking the railroad strike. Pearson's attitude was simply this: give them a rifle diet for a few days. The result was a gun battle between striking workers and the militia units. This was the bloodiest riot in the history of the city of Pittsburgh. Now, another man with Lawrenceville connections was Harry E. Sheldon. He's a man who was born in Freeport in 1861. He's orphaned at the age of 2, and he's placed in the Episcopal Home for Widows and Orphans at what is now 40th and Penn Avenue. Poor Harry Sheldon, he had a speech impediment, so at the age of 9, they threw him out of school because they thought he was slow. Now, the Episcopal Home didn't want to throw poor little kid out in the streets, so they let him work for his keep. At the age of 14, he left the home in order to go to work in a machine shop. Now, while Harry was, and he made $2 a week at this first job. While Harry had this speech impediment, and everybody kind of looked down upon him as being academically slow, considering the fact he's thrown out of school at the age of 9, he had a natural aptitude when it came to machinery and metals. He would go to various machine shops and mills, and he'd keep working his way up in the companies into management positions. Eventually, he would marry, and he would go into business with his father-in-law and several other partners, and they would form the Allegheny Steel and Iron Company. At first, this company started making sheet steel for electrical products. Then, by 1926, there were a series of mergers, but by 1926, he is the head of a firm that is the world's largest producer of stainless steel. For many years, Harry's company was known as Allegheny Ludlam. Now, Harry Sheldon never forgot the poor orphans at the Lawrenceville home, and he was very generous toward them. Eventually, he established the Harry E. Sheldon Cavalry Camp along Lake Erie, and to this day, it still serves disadvantaged children. So you can see, Lawrenceville had its own version of Horatio Alger's. When we look at this period between 1865 and 1914, we find that there's an explosion not only in terms of population, but the community becomes very diverse. And with more people, we have more schools, churches, businesses, industries, and social clubs. Lawrenceville during this period can best be described as a self-contained community where one did not have to leave the neighborhood to work, go to school, or socialize. Everything you wanted was in Lawrenceville. Now, in the second half of Lawrenceville's first 100 years of history, we find that there are at least 5 public schools, 2 Lutheran schools, and 4 additional Catholic schools being built. In addition, the first school for blind children opened in Lawrenceville in October 1890 at the corner of Sherrod and 42nd Streets. The community was home to more than 30 churches. We find there was an evolution in parks. The 2 most prominent parks in the community were Arsenal Park, opened in 1907, and Lawrence, later renamed Leslie Park, which opened in 1903. The 4.71-acre Lawrence Park was purchased by the city of Pittsburgh from the estate of the iron magnate John Schoenberger for a cost of $45,516. In 1908, a swimming pool was added to Lawrence Park, and Lawrenceville became one of the first neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh to have such an amenity. Moreover, 3 hospitals find their home in Lawrenceville during this period. St. Francis opens its doors in 1865. St. Margaret Memorial Hospital wanted to open in 1898, but the Board of Trustees felt there were not adequate resources to properly operate the facility, so they delayed the opening until 1910. And the 3rd hospital was the Marine Hospital along Penn Avenue between 39th and 40th Streets. The cornerstone for this facility was laid in December 1908. Since most homes did not have the luxury of running water, a public bathhouse was established at 3445 Butler Street in 1898. Our business environment also changed. Among the businesses that played a key role in the economic development of Lawrenceville during this period were the Black Lead and Crucible Works, which was located on 36th Street below the railroad tracks, and it started business in 1875. Heppenstall's was another major employer. McConway Torley, at its peak in 1904, employed 1,500 people. And we also find that in Lawrenceville they were building locomotives at the H.K. Porter Locomotive Company, which started in 1866. Now, not everything was pie in the sky in Lawrenceville in those golden years. We had a riot, and get this, that riot took place in Allegheny Cemetery. On March 12th, 1901, Christopher Lyman McGee was being laid to rest. He was a very popular state politician. He was especially loved by the women of the city, even though they couldn't vote for him. But he was so popular that when he died, tens of thousands of people literally lined the streets to pay their respects. And there's this huge funeral procession coming into Allegheny Cemetery. And behind the hearse were a number of wagon loads of flowers from people who sent them to pay their respects. They sent flowers. Well, as soon as the service concluded, a large mob of women decided they wanted a souvenir to remember Christopher Lyman McGee by. So they attacked the flowers. Next thing you know, they're punching and shoving and pushing one another, and there's this huge riot breaking out in Allegheny Cemetery over flowers on this poor dead guy's grave. The superintendent of police was A.H. Leslie, and he said to his squadron of men, "Gentlemen, take out your billy clubs and knock some sense into these women." And that ended the 1901 riot of Allegheny Cemetery. Now, when people say there wasn't any crime in Pittsburgh in the good old days, guess again. In 1906, the entire east end of Pittsburgh was held in terror by a large number of burglaries and robberies. These were committed by a man simply known as the Man in Black. This reign of terror went on for months. The people of the East End were so afraid that they wanted the city of Pittsburgh to authorize a bond release, a bond issue, to finance 100 additional police officers. Well, the burglaries kept up and they kept the city paralyzed until Inspector William J. Boyle of the Lawrenceville Police Station cracked the case. Once he arrested the man he thought was the Man in Black, the wave of burglaries stopped, and the city taxpayers were spared the expense of issuing the bonds. Another key event during this period in Lawrenceville history was the controversial building of a new school on the former grounds of the Lawrenceville Burying Grounds. See, when Lawrenceville was a borough, they acquired the Lawrenceville Burying Ground from the village. And then when the city of Pittsburgh annexed Lawrenceville, it acquired all borough properties. In around 1880, the city school board wanted to build a new public school. So he says, here's this tract of land in Lawrenceville, and we don't have to buy and spend money on land. The problem was that the workers were very disrespectful of the graves, and they began to dig up the bodies and scatter bones everywhere. Morrison Foster, who was the brother of the famous composer Stephen C. Foster, and other civic-minded men from Pittsburgh, got an injunction to stop this desecration. The court battle lasted between 1881 and 1883. Finally, the two parties came to a resolution. It was agreed that the bodies that could be moved to Allegheny Cemetery would be moved. The bodies that could not be moved would be surrounded with a fence. And there would be a monument erected to the soldiers that were buried at the Lawrenceville Burying Ground. The monument read, "We will emulate their patriotism and protect their remains forever." Well, I hope we did a better job of emulating their patriotism, because we did a lousy job of protecting their remains. Phase 3 of Lawrenceville. Lawrenceville frowns. After World War I, we find a gradual decline in Lawrenceville's population. At the turn of the 20th century, we had 33,000 people. By 1940, the population dropped to 30,000. By 1960, it was down to 23,000. 1990, it dipped to 12,000, and today stands somewhere around 9,300. From 1914 and for the next century, Lawrenceville would continue to make history. In 1918, patriotic fervor swept through Lawrenceville. The Lawrenceville Board of Trade wanted to do something for the soldiers on the European front. So they held a carnival in Arsenal Park, and they raised a good bit of money. However, an armistice was declared before the money could be distributed to the troops. So it was decided that a monument to honor the World War I veterans would be erected at the junction of Penn Avenue and Butler Streets. Alan George Newman, the celebrated New York sculptor, was commissioned to build this statue. It cost $10,000 and took 1 year to complete. After World War II, the names of the veterans from that conflict were added to the base of the Doughboy statue. Today, the Doughboy stands at the entrance of Lawrenceville and is regarded as a symbol of the community. Now, one of the worst disasters in the history of the neighborhood took place on June 17, 1923, when the Atlantic Refinery at 57th and Butler Streets caught fire. 100,000 barrels of oil were destroyed, and there was $1 million worth of property damage. What made this tragedy so terrible was the fact that there was Mount Albion School located right across the street from the refinery. And all the school kids are watching the firemen fight the fire. Some barrels of oil exploded, hurling balls of fire toward the children. Between 60 and 80 children had to be treated at either St. Francis or St. Margaret's Hospital for burns. Now, if it were not enough for the community to struggle through the Great Depression of the 1930s, the neighborhood was also a victim of the flood of 1936. The winter of 1935-1936 was an extremely harsh winter. We had a tremendous amount of snow and ice. Then, between March 16th and 19th of 1936, 6 inches of rain fell across the western half of the state. Soon, large portions of Lawrenceville were underwater. People had to take refuge in shelters that were set up at St. John Roman Catholic Elementary School at 36th and Liberty, or at the Boys Club at 45th and Butler Streets. when a gas line ruptured on 44th Street, destroying a house. An 11-year-old child who was watching with some of her friends the floodwaters was struck by flying debris and killed. Several other children had to be hospitalized. And to make matters worse, the Waverly Oil Refinery at 54th Street caught fire and burned for several days. One of the most bizarre tragedies that ever took place in Lawrenceville occurred on October 11th, 1940 at the Salvation Army Industrial Home for Men at their home at Home and Plummer Streets. It turned out that someone, because it was not clearly marked, grabbed a packet of roach powder and thought it was baking powder, mixed it into the pancake batter. Large numbers of men suddenly became violently ill and had to be hospitalized. 12 men died and 43 men had extended hospital stays. The detectives ruled that it was sloppy housekeeping rather than criminal intent. With the advent of World War II, we find that the mills in Lawrenceville were being revived. Now, Lawrenceville was never immune to tragedies. Perhaps the most devastating fire in the history of the community took place on January 11, 1973, when the Beacon Warehouse in the 5300 block of Butler Street caught fire. Nearly 4 city blocks were completely destroyed or severely damaged. That day, the temperature suddenly dropped, and firemen were fighting not only the fire, they were battling heavy winds and freezing conditions. The weather was so cold that day that as the water was propelled from the fire hoses, it literally froze in midair. Eventually, the fire was brought under control, but not before there were $12.8 million worth of damages to properties. Now, another tragedy was the closing of the mills in Lawrenceville. When Heppenstall's closed in 1979, 500 people lost their jobs. As the 20th century drew to a close and the 21st century dawned, the community also saw a large number of churches and schools closed. The community was very hard hit when St. Francis Hospital shuttered its doors and when St. Margaret Memorial Hospital decided to leave Lawrenceville for Aspinwall. On Thursday, September 24th, 2009, a showdown between the authorities and 1,000 protesters opposing the G20 summit, which was then meeting in downtown Pittsburgh, took place in Lawrenceville when the protesters decided to make Arsenal Park on 40th Street their rallying point. Since the protesters did not have a permit, the authorities said it was illegal. The police now are strongly reinforced by outside units, and most of the protesters were unarmed. However, it was considered an illegal demonstration. The demonstrators said, wait a second, we have civil and constitutional rights, and we are going to march on downtown Pittsburgh. Soon, the protesters began to file out of Arsenal Park. By the time they got to 37th and Butler Street, the police hit them with at least 2 canisters of tear gas, driving them back up the hill. A number of these protesters dispersed and went home, but some went out into other neighborhoods and caused some vandalism, and a number reorganized and they continued their march on downtown Pittsburgh. However, by the time they got to the junction of Penn Avenue and Butler Street near 34th Street, the police had them all surrender. And that ended the great protest against the G20 summit.
Wait, when was that?
In Lawrenceville.
Wait, what year was that?
2009.
I was there. I was there.
Okay?
I did that. Yep.
Incidentally, the city had a number of lawsuits filed against it for the infringement of civil liberties, and the city as far as I know, lost every single one of them.
Every single one. The ACLU got into it, and on constitutional grounds, the whole thing that happened was a violation of the Constitution. And they rightly got their payments and an apology and set a precedent for other rallies being held under constitutional grounds. So it was a very important case and had a very positive outlook.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the fourth face of Lawrenceville. Trendy Lawrenceville question mark. In more recent years, there have been profound changes in Lawrenceville, especially with the building of Children's Hospital. In the last decade or so, we have seen in Lawrenceville, especially along Butler Street, a tremendous transformation. Someone deemed about 10 years ago that Lawrenceville was a hotspot or a trendy neighborhood. Suddenly, restaurants, art galleries, and boutiques sprang up throughout Lawrenceville and on portions of Penn Avenue. Real estate values suddenly skyrocketed. Properties that you couldn't give away 20 years ago are today commanding between $200,000 and $400,000. Just a few months ago, a building on 45th Street sold for an incredible $748,000. Will this trend last, or is it a flash in the pan? Now, the problem is that we don't have a crystal ball to look down the line 30 or 40 years from now. Keep in mind that trends are long-term. They're not short-term. So the verdict is still out on the future of Lawrenceville. While gentrification did help raise real estate values in Lawrenceville, it also created another problem. Our taxes went sky high. As a widowed mother of 4 told me, when my kids were in school, Lawrenceville was the only place I could afford. Now I have such a huge tax bill, I don't know if I can afford to stay in my home, and I can't afford to move. Now, in the last decade or so, there have not been any compilation on statistical data indicating how many properties are being flipped, which could be causing a bubble. Nor are there any statistics to show what percentage of Lawrenceville's population is transient. Gentrification has brought a new breed to the area, of people to the area. You may have read about the battle between some of the new people that have come into the area and McConway-Torley. McConway-Torley employs 400 people and is the largest for-profit company in the neighborhood. Even though the company employs people, pays taxes, provides a valuable industrial service, and complies with all current environmental regulations, some people have decided that McConway-Torley is a polluter. Now, one would wonder, if you're so worried about pollution, why in the heck would you buy a house near a mill? But obviously somebody did. And every so often, there's a battle that erupts in Lawrenceville between the new breed and the old-timers. And this battle over the changing face of Lawrenceville, in the McConway-Torley episode, is just one chapter in this battle that periodically flares up. Recently, on May 17, 2015, a letter in the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review by a long-term Lawrenceville resident wrote, "These whiners don't have any real sense of community. Maybe they feel our community would be better served by another doggy park or fern garden, rather than a resource for hundreds of livelihoods at stake. Lawrenceville is, quote, a trendy neighborhood, but it's not a community, and it hasn't been one for some time. These people wish they could create the ideal community by getting rid of the things they don't like. They wish." At 62, I doubt that I'll be around for the next 40 or 50 years to see how this next phase of Lawrenceville life pans out. Lawrenceville is a fascinating community that is rich in history. It is my sincere hope that when we leave here tonight, each one of us will take a look at our respective neighborhoods and begin to document the rich history of those communities. Let us hope that in some future eon, new generations will look back on our work and say of us, they cared enough about their history, their heritage, and their institutions to preserve them for posterity. For your kindness in allowing me to be here with you, I can only say thank you, and may God bless all of you.
We're going to have a lot of questions here. Go ahead, let's start.
Okay.
Just two quick questions. One is, where did the name Lawrenceville come from? And the second question is, wasn't the Arsenal fire, wasn't that a bigger tragedy than the others that you mentioned? Wasn't there over 100 people killed in that?
Okay, first one, Lawrenceville is named after Captain James Lawrence, naval hero of the War of 1812, best remembered for the line, "Don't give up the ship." Okay, Foster was really going to call his community Fosterville, but after a few days he changed his mind because he was so inspired by the patriotism of Captain James Lawrence. As far as the Allegheny Arsenal explosion of September 17, 1862, yes, it is the worst civilian disaster in the history of the American Civil War. And to this day, it remains the greatest unsolved mystery. When 3 disastrous explosions ripped through one of the laboratories, the whole arsenal is not destroyed. One laboratory is. Of the 156 people working there, 78 are killed and another 12 or so wounded. And most of them are teenage girls. I said that this is an unsolved mystery of the 19th century. There were 2 investigations into this tragedy. The first was the coroner's inquest. Now the problem with the coroner's inquest is that they took depositions. So I'd like to pick on this guy. He could be lying. You could be telling the truth, and you could think you were telling the truth. Everything happened so fast. Black gunpowder just goes up in a flash. So when you have a situation like that and everything happens, there's mass confusion. That literally became hell with the lid blown off. You can just imagine the thick white smoke from burning powder, the black smoke from burning embers from the timbers that are falling in there, the stench from the burning bodies, the body fragment parts that are being thrown through the air and scattered across the arsenal grounds. People are coming into the arsenal to help, and it's adding to the confusion. I mean, all this takes place within 20 seconds.
Wait, you mean where Arsenal
Field is in the field behind Arsenal School, inside Arsenal Park near Davison Street. There was a frame laboratory there. It blew up and killed 78 people.
So that's where it was, in that park?
Yes, it was right in that park.
Oh, wow.
Now they took, the depositions were taken at the coroner's inquest. So there's no cross-examination. So we really don't know who's telling the truth and who isn't. There will be, in October 1862, a second inquiry into the Arsenal explosion. This has a problem. While there's cross-examination, both by the judges and by Colonel Symington, who's acting his own defense lawyer, he will only call witnesses he can't discredit or people that agree with him. And the only they call the wagon driver, who's a man by the name of Frick, Joseph Frick. He says that he saw a spark fly from the wheel of his wagon or his horse's hoof on this flint road on the road and sets off a spark. There's an open barrel gunpowder. It goes off, sets off a number of other explosions. When the military inquest questions Frick, Symington says, "Mr. Frick, at the coroner's inquest, you said, you gave this whole story about how you saw the spark and how this happened. Yet, right after the explosion, when Mr. McBride, the superintendent of the arsenal, asked you what happened, you said, I don't know." And what's Frick say? He said, "Well, so many questions were asked me that day, I don't know what I was saying." And then they have Dr. Thompson has come to the stand, and Dr. Thompson says, you know, this Frick guy, he's kind of shady. He's telling me that he has this gaping hole in his head, and he has these severe burns on his hands. And yeah, he had some burns on his hand, but he didn't want to take off his hat. And when he does take off his hat, I see a superficial wound on his head. So that sounds like he's, you know, not too reliable as a witness for himself. But we didn't know much about concussions in those days. So theoretically, it is possible to have a superficial cut in a major concussion. So the only woman who could have possibly seen the explosion was Rachel Dunlap. She's standing on, she's taking a break from her job. She's on the porch number 12, and she's by this door, and she claims she collaborates for its testimony. No women were called to testify at the military inquest. So without cross-examination, we will never know if Rachel Dunlap was telling the truth or not. We can only assume she was. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
What are the boundaries of Lawrence?
Wherever the real estate is the highest, that is the boundary of Lawrence. Everybody argues over this. For general purposes, it probably runs from about 34th Street up to Liberty, over Holly to Allegheny Cemetery, and then down to, some say 62nd, some say 72nd Street. There's not a whole heck of a lot done in that area along Butler Street. So,
Is there a political position just for Lawrenceville?
no. Lawrenceville is part of the city of Pittsburgh. They are represented supposedly by somebody on city council. And it's also supposedly represented by the mayor. Okay, yes, sir.
A lot of Pittsburgh neighborhoods have a distinct ethnic identity, like Squirrel Hill and Bloomfield, the Polish Hill. Is Lawrenceville identified with that?
Lawrenceville originally was pretty ethnically diverse. If you look at the historical trends, the earliest settlers were the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. These are the English, Scots-Irish, and Irish Protestants. As you get into like the 1830s through the 1850s, you also start to see Irish and Germans moving in. And then in the 1870s, huge influx of Irish, and then later on, by the 1890s, you start finding Polish and Slovenians. And so you do have ethnic diversity. That's not true today, because after World War II, people start intermarrying. You know, one time, if you married outside your faith or outside your ethnic group, that was considered taboo. But you know, it's like the joke that still goes around today that says, when the last German marries the last Irish person, and the last Polish person marries the last Italian, the last Greek will still marry the last Greek. Yes, ma'am.
It's just interesting when you mentioned the McConway and Turley Steel Foundry. I got a letter from an organization called Gas.
Yes, they're against smog. They're the ones that have initiated it. If you look at the county report that just came out a few days ago, they were actually in better compliance than the limit of the law.
Well, the letter said.
I know what the letter said,
Did you
but
get
I'm
it?
going, yes, I saw the letter, and I'm saying what the county came out with. The county health department was there, and if McConway Torley has to cut their production from 93,000 tons of steel a year to 23,000, it will close that foundry and lay off 400 people.
Well, it says they were the third largest source of benzene and third largest source of manganese, according to this.
It's according to them, and I'm going to go with according to the health department.
Well,
The
that's
health
what the
department ruled.
said.
The health department ruled that they are in compliance with all environmental regulations. Yes, sir.
It's on New Year.
I have a question, two questions about the Leslie Park. When was Lawrence Park renamed Leslie Park? And is Leslie Park actually named after a Leslie, say, the Republican boss Max G. Leslie?
It was after Max G. and his brother Averill Leslie. It was named, and it was sometime, I'm not sure when it was renamed, but I think it was well into 1930s. It was still called Lawrence Park. Yes, sir.
Do you have an update on Sherm Edwards Candy or Edward Mark Candy Company in Lawrenceville?
I'm not familiar with either of them.
I heard they located there. They just opened a store in the Pentagon, so maybe they're going to be big time from Lawrenceville.
I don't know. There's a lot of small shops and boutiques and art galleries. Several years ago, the Tribune Review had an article which I found kind of interesting because they were opening so many art galleries in the east end of Pittsburgh. I think between Lawrenceville, Garfield, Bloomfield, and East Liberty, we had something like 30 art galleries, and they're closing as fast as they were opening. It was called the revolving door of art galleries. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
We have a foundry in Lawrenceville called Springfield Casting.
Springfield Casting, I believe, was down around 31st Street in Smallman.
Oh, okay.
It was more down a little bit past Lawrence's boundary.
Yeah. I just wanted to work.
Yes, sir.
There was an organization called 1662 that started in the strip and went to the 62nd Street Bridge. And that was the birth of all the art galleries and the craft shops. And
That's true,
that's where
yes.
They all moved in.
That's when they
That was
started.
an organization.
It was an organization heavily funded by tax dollars.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I have two small questions. One is, do you know what the oldest house that's still left in Lawrenceville is? And then the second is, I know they tore down some log cabins. Do you know what happened to that?
The owner of the property supposedly still has the logs from the cabin. That probably went back to the 1820s and was one of the oldest buildings. One of the big problems with Lawrenceville is that when you go into about the 1960s, people started covering over a lot of the buildings with siding and shingles, you name it. So you kind of, and they changed the fenestration or the openings in the structures. So a lot of times it's hard to tell the age of buildings. As far as I can tell, the oldest building in Lawrenceville is the Stone Magazine in Arsenal Park. That goes back 1817 to 1819. But you'll find a number of houses on 38th Street that still go back to the 1830s. Yes, ma'am.
How do you see the development of the area south of Butler Street along the river?
There is a controversy going on, and it's one of these fights, like I said, that periodically erupt. Recently, there's been a proposal to put where one of the mills were, right below the 40th Street Bridge, 190 units of housing and apartments. And they're only allowing 130 parking spots because everybody's going to ride their little bicycles. And it's the ordinance, the zoning is out of date. It's just out of date. I mean, people have 2 and 3 cars, and it says all new construction has to have 1 parking spot per unit unless you get a 45% variance by encouraging bicycle riding or public transportation. And the caveat there is encouraging, not mandating. So right now, there's a lot of people down, there was a hearing not too long ago. A number of the residents along Willow Street were opposed to it because of traffic and parking. Any other questions?
Come on out. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you again.
Be aware how much work was put into this talk for us. It's great. Several things. First of all, we have 2 other board members. I forgot to recognize before. Jim Hammond is here, and Audrey Glickman behind the camera, part of our 8-person board. So here's the wrap-up. Remember to come and hear about Warhol next month, number 1. Number 2, if you're interested in the 8th of August, if you know that already, sign up. If not, you can call me. We'll probably have spaces at least till 2 weeks before the 8th of August, so you can get to me later. We also have 1 more meeting. But if you signed up before and you're interested still, please say yes. If you know you can't go, please strike your name out. It'll save me time in terms of counting. I also should mention that Helen Wilson in the back is the lady who writes your wonderful Squirrel Hill articles in the Squirrel Hill News that you see every month. So she's the source of that. We have a tradition here. We have a little bit of co-op in this group. We ask that everyone help take the chairs into the back. We'll have one of our people directing how you hang them up. If you would do that for us. I want to thank you for coming. We never would have imagined 2 years ago that on a lecture on a neighboring neighborhood, we would have over 60 people here. But that's what happens now. By the way, you know, this reinforces something that those of us who work with Squirrel Hill history know for a long time, how young a neighborhood Squirrel Hill is compared to some of the other neighborhoods around it. We really, probably Squirrel Hill is the youngest of all of these neighborhoods that we talk about. So I just might mention that. Cheers up. If someone in my group would go out and get all the signs and bring them to me, please. Thank you very much. You don't have to rush away. We have